Good day. My name is Michael Bednar. This is the Center for Fiscal Equity, and these are comments for the House Budget Committee on getting rid of the debt limit. It's time to repeal. It's never an issue when Republicans are in control of both houses in the White House. Suddenly, when the Democrats are in charge, it becomes an issue. Funny that. If there were a larger majority, it probably wouldn't come up. Usually, when the debt limit issue is raised, it's an attempt to restrict discretionary spending or build support for cutting entitlements. Now, the best way to get beyond this is to have more unanimous consent agreements, ending the use of Senate holds for the purposes of grandstanding and preventing those agreements, and returning to open rules in the House, especially on fiscal issues. As an aside, of course, 55 is a nice number for cloture, although any limit can be misused by members of the majority when their eyes are on the TV cameras. So we shall not name names at the moment. For comedy, though, I don't expect. Comedy is not something I expect, period. At least not for now. Maybe after filing deadlines for primaries have passed, or there's a decisive result in November, maybe there'll be some more comedy. Think 1974 rather than 2010. Many constitutional and budgetary scholars believe that the debt limit is unconstitutional under the provisions of the 14th Amendment. They're likely correct. It's also likely seen as a political question, and testing it as a legal matter involves the likelihood of lawsuits after bonds are issued without regard to the limit in an effort to prevent default. It's pretty high stakes, so no, thank you. The constitutional issue can be settled in bipartisan legislation to further define 14th Amendment procedures, including those regarding insurrectionist candidates for the Congress and the presidency or members, and specify how to cure the timetable for curing the disability, like for instance during the electoral vote count. As such, it would change the Electoral Vote Count Act, so that people can make that objection, put it in order, and then submit it for a 2/3 vote of each house. And if that 2/3 vote doesn't come in favor of the candidate whose eligibility is being challenged, then for the reason of insurrection or bribery, then the party has to withdraw that member, and the vice president would then be the nominee, or the president-elect if his side won, or her side. This legislation should also include constitutional convention calls. This is a demand of balanced budget believers everywhere. The lack of rules is the main obstacle for the convention call process. Right now, specifically, must a convention call focus on a single issue, or call for a general convention explicitly, or can any convention call matter from any state on any issue? There are those who say there's already a convention call legitimate and in place because 2/3 of the states have, on one occasion or the other, said, let's have a constitutional convention. That has not seemed to move the Congress. But if there are rules, we would know what it means. And right now there aren't any. So the question is, must it be, again, specific, or authorize a general convention, or and that's an easy matter to codify, as is the issue of whether convention calls are in perpetuity or whether they must be submitted within the current Congress, like other legislation. If you have a motion to do a convention call in Congress, and it's not passed, you can reintroduce it. I think you probably have to should probably have to reintroduce convention calls as well with all the petitions during that time of that Congress. Now, as to the balanced budget amendment, it's effectively an effort to stop majority action and prevent tax increases, but this will never get support of two-thirds of both houses, which is what you have to do to submit an amendment to the states. So the only way to get a balanced budget amendment is to have procedures that have it come from the states and have enough states do it again within whatever time frame the Congress dictates. But the Congress should dictate it. My point being, not that I'm in favor of this provision. I am not, because it basically allows the minority to say no tax increases, even when they're necessary, and even if it would balance the budget, which is Kafkaesque at best. But it should be put in the bill as something to cater to the side the conservative side who would want that. The other thing to do is to leave the debt limit in place, but only for very rare circumstances. And the circumstances I mean is if we do some kind of reform that has automatic appropriations inside of either a joint budget resolution or the Budget Control Act, which would act if there is no joint budget resolution or a resolution of any kind, and then have provisions to automatically enact current services at the beginning of the fiscal year. I've got a attachment. I will record that in more detail, but you can see that in some cases these reforms would have to have some kind of break, because if you have automatic spending increases and automatic entitlements, and there's something going on with tax revenues, you might want to invoke an objection saying some kind of debt limit has been reached, just to stop something like hyperinflation from going on. And we do not have hyperinflation, but it should. But it should. The threat, of course, of an automatic process means the process will never be used. Right now, the punitive numbers aren't being used, and they should be realistic in the Budget Control Act. And I hope it wouldn't be used, but of course, I never thought that people would storm the Capitol to overturn an election either. So, if such toxicity continues, we may need to have some kind of automatic provision and actually use it to prevent grandstanding. So, any debt limit in that case, should be rare. And if you had, and the Budget Control Act and a joint budget resolution would automatically include debt limit increases. So that's important too. And again, unless the wheels come off the economy, they would never be triggered. Right now though, that should be the emergency brake. Tapping the brakes constantly, however, means the nation is in second gear, which is what it is in now. So now let's take the opportunity to address the debt explosion. There will be a video on this as well that will be linked to right there. Of course, the long-term solution is adequate tax revenue. Then you don't need the debt limit to balance the budget. If there are less debt all the time because we're paying the interest off, then this whole question is not necessary to talk about anymore. It's important to understand, though, who owns and owes the debt. We're currently revising our previous study, settling and squaring accounts, who really owes the national debt, who owns it, and there'll be a link in the chat about how to order that book, and I'll provide free copies to the committee, and I'll provide when the next edition is upon request, and when the next edition is published, I'll of course provide it. The next edition is called "Debt as the National Debt as Class Warfare." Why do I call it that? Well, it's because if you look at the debt, the top 22,000 households break even on how much they owe and how much they own. And what they owe is based on the taxes that they pay. There's no such thing as a per capita debt. It's the debt's possible through income taxes, and it's owned by who owns the accounts. The national debt is essentially leverage for capitalism. If a fund has, or the Federal Reserve has debt certificates, it can make loans, it can leverage stock schemes, all of that. It can buy stock without some kind of national debt ownership. You can't have things like that, and then the stock market is it's worth what it's usually worth, which is nothing. Intrinsically, it's worth what the last sucker will pay for it. People have debt in these accounts so that at least you've got the national debt, and that's payable by taxes, and again, taxes to the rich. If we decrease the debt and decrease stock ownership, of course, outside ownership, and have more employee ownership, then capitalism fades away. There'll never be a revolution by election. We'll have evolution. So the masses have never voted for socialism, and maybe social democracy, but actual ownership, no, that's got to be incremental. So how to get there? Again, I've got a tax reform plan, and I will link to that in the comments, and it's also attached in the written request. The main point, though, is for taxes to go up, people with high incomes and high wealth, and their children, especially their children, need to benefit from such reforms. This truism also applies to climate change. Until the people who own energy companies have an interest in doing that, it's not going to happen. Or if Florida starts to have sea level rises in Miami and the Keys suddenly go away, unless there's action in that area, there's not going to be any action in that area. Again, the tax reform plan has a little something for everybody, and again, it will be linked. To get there, we need calm discussion rather than grandstanding, particularly over the debt limit. It's absolutely essential. And that is the 15 minutes they allow for videos. Again, information's in the chat. If you're an outsider, you can join. If you're an insider, you can join and subscribe, and please share. Please share with your colleagues. Please share with anybody you know who is a budget geek like you and I are. So thank you very much. Have a pleasant day.